Hello, everybody, and today we're going to focus on the Mongols, the most exciting part of history because the Mongols just change everything. And in a lot of ways, people consider the Mongols to be the beginnings of the modern world. So, this is topic 2.2. We're now in Unit 2. And the reason why we skipped 2.1 is because we're going to combine that later with a couple of the other topics to cut down on how long it takes us to get through the unit so we can stay on pace for covering all of AP world history in the time of virtual reality. So, without any further ado, let's get cracking on the Mongols. So, the first thing is to talk about the rise of the Mongols. When we look at the rise of the Mongols, we want to understand the background of the Eurasian steppe. So, if you take a look at all this green that's highlighted in the map, you'll see that the steppe refers to a, a biozone. It refers to a geographical region that stretches from parts of present day Hungary through Romania, Ukraine, through Kazakhstan, through the Gobi Desert into Mongolia, and even into Manchuria. So when we talk about this geographical location, it stretches across Eurasia and it is comprised of, I guess, grasslands, is a passage kind of between the areas. And for a long time, this has acted as a conduit of movement for human beings. So, your geographical location, I just want you to appreciate that we're talking about a climate area, an environment that is to the north, a lot of agrarian societies. So, this actually ends up being the home to a number of nomadic tribes. The Mongols are going to be one of them. The Turks are going to be one group that over centuries migrated along this area and eventually moved their way in through into what is present day Turkey. There's going to be other groups that have a variety of names, but the Mongols are the big ones I want you to know. And if you think about the situation that they're in terms of their environment, these grasslands aren't exactly suitable for extensive farming, not the way these river valleys are going to be. So if you take a look, kind of big picture, you see to the south of the steppes are all these river valleys. And around these river valleys, agrarian societies are going to grow and develop. These areas do not have this river valley network to develop agriculture extensively. And if you look to the north, you see the river valleys up there, but these are much colder climates, and the likelihood of developing sustainable agrarian societies is going to be very slim. So instead of getting an agrarian culture, we're going to get nomadic cultures. And these nomadic groups are going to move across the steppes. They're going to be moving animals, herds of animals, and allowing those animals to graze on the grasslands. Those animals, those herds will become the basis of their food supply. So even though they are nomadic and they're not as big as the agrarian societies, they still represent complex political, economic, and social organizations of human beings. The most important thing, though, is to understand the role of horses to the Mongols and also to the nomadic tribes. Since they are so mobile, horse riding is going to be emphasized within the culture of these nomadic groups. And everyone, men, women, children, are going to learn how to ride horses and they're going to become masters of this. That gives them a military edge over a number of agrarian societies. You're creating a highly mobile army. And the other thing is that you're creating something that the agrarian societies want, namely horses, to increase the size and strength of their military. So over time, a relationship between the agrarian societies and the nomadic groups are going to develop. Sometimes this relationship is cooperative. Sometimes it is in conflict with one another. So that brings us to the Mongolian tribe, or the Mongols. Culturally, there's two values that I want you to focus on with them. So they come out of the nomadic traditions. They are stellar horse riders. The Mongols, women and men, they ride since they're able to walk, and even then before then. So in terms of cultural values, women in the Mongolian societies have much more of an equal status with men than we would see in the agrarian societies. So if you remember how I've talked about the patriarchy in other societies, when it comes to nomadic groups, and especially to the Mongolian groups, that patriarchy is much less severe. Women enjoy much greater freedoms, much greater rights. And this is largely true of any nomadic group and any pastoralist group, where women have a much higher status in society. The other thing is, in terms of religion, the best way to put it for the Mongols is they believe in kind of a shamanism. A shaman is like a medicine man, has been commonly referred to. It's somebody who can get in touch with the divine and interpret what the divine wants. So you can kind of connect this to animism. You can connect this to the idea that there's spirits in the world and that shamans or priests are the ones who communicate with the spirits to figure out what the spirits want. So there's a worship of these spirits, there's a worship of the sun. We would call this much more paganistic. So we're going to keep those two cultural values in mind as we go forward. And the big thing with the Mongols is you need to know the rise of Genghis Khan. Now, Genghis Khan is Genghis Khan literally translates to as the Khan, the great Khan, or the Khan of everyone else, the emperor of the Khan. So the Khans are like leaders of different tribes of the Mongols. So without getting into too much detail, think of the Mongols as a group divided into tribes. And these tribes compete for leadership. They compete with one another. There's attacks on one another. There's assassinations. And what Genghis Khan does is he unifies the tribes under one ruler, the Great Khan. And that's Genghis Khan. So the word Genghis Khan is actually his title, the Great Khan. We can also see this as Chinggis Khan. Chinggis Khan, however you wish to pronounce it. Usually we see it as Genghis Khan, but sometimes you'll see it as Chinggis Khan. This name, Temujin, that's his original name. That's who he was before he was known as the Genghis Khan. So the idea is you want to recognize that all three of these names is the same person as that person from history that was the leader of the Mongols and created an empire like nobody had ever seen before. So let's get to how they do that. So if you take a look at the map as it unfolds, they're going to conquer me in a second. This is the spread of the Mongols. And they start off in what is present-day Mongolia. They spread initially west, and then they go into China, and then they split up into 4 groups. So I'll let that play one more time before I pause it. They make their way to Europe, these Mongols. So you have to, oops, let me back it up. I can't stop this. That's not good. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen? You're going to be watching this spread as I talk. Try and ignore that as much as you can. So the military tactics of Genghis Khan is what he's most known for. Let me see if I can help you by kind of just covering that up a little bit. One thing he does with his military is he promotes on the basis of meritocracy. What he does is he promotes people not based on family connections, but rather on loyalty to Genghis Khan and talent in the battle. So again, we see this practice of meritocracy helping to create a strong foundation of government and of the military in this case. The second thing is that the Mongol army is highly mobile. They are archers shooting from the backs of horses who are moving full speed. And if you just take a moment to appreciate the skill that would be involved in doing that, in being able to ride a horse at full speed and hit a target with your bow and arrow, you appreciate just how well trained and how well ingrained military culture was for the Mongols. And what this does, especially when it comes into Europe, when the Mongols make their way into Russia, into parts of present-day Ukraine, and they come into contact with the European knights, this essentially is going to start putting an end to the armored knight. Because the armored knight, slow, bulky, cannot compete with this fast, mobile, and distant enemy. The third thing is that Genghis Khan was known for his brutal tactics and his psychological warfare. Basically, he would give a city a chance to surrender, and if they didn't, once he got done conquering them, he would execute people to make a point of don't screw with the Mongols. And it got to the point where people, when they saw that the Mongols were coming, would just offer their surrender right away. So what Genghis Khan understood was that in warfare, you want people to be scared to death of you. You want people thinking that you're going to come in and eat their eyes. And if that's the reputation you have going forward, then nobody will fight with you. Now, this is best summed up by a story. And if you guys take a look at this map, coming back to it, and this is present day Iran. If you watch the expansion into Iran, I'm sorry, I'll go right back. The expansion into Iran, that's the story of the conquest of the Khwarezmian dynasty. So basically, by about the 1200s, in what is present day Iran, there is this Khwarezmian dynasty. It's really just another form of the Persian Empire. And Genghis Khan, as he's making his way out west, he sends word to this dynasty and he says, let's make a deal. I want to do business with you. I want to just do trade. Let's enter into a trade arrangement. And Genghis Khan sends a envoy of hundreds of people. And the leaders of this dynasty slaughters his envoys. He slaughters the messengers. He slaughters the ambassadors. Genghis Khan doesn't take kindly to that. And over the next 2 years, he destroys this dynasty to the point that the dynasty is obliterated. Cities are burned to the ground. Cities that were once great trading cities along the Silk Road are decimated. Within 2 years, this dynasty that had made its money off of the Silk Road was no more. And the Mongols take over. And that leader who ordered the execution of Genghis Khan's envoy was captured in the battle. And as punishment, they poured molten lead down his throat as his way of being executed, because they wanted the world to know not to defy the Mongols when they asked for something. The other thing he does is, while he may kill the leaders and he may kill the aristocrats, he does recruit skilled laborers from all parts of this empire. So I know I've been having this map going, and hopefully you're ignoring it. But as he stretches the Mongolian Empire out, he comes into contact with a variety of people with a variety of skills. And what he does is he takes those engineers and he takes those laborers and he takes the military design, weapon designers, he takes the bureaucrats, and he moves them about the empire. And this is going to become a really important concept. So when Genghis Khan comes in and conquers an area, he doesn't execute the people who make the weapons. He brings those people into service in his military, and he says, how did you make those weapons? And now he's starting to amass knowledge of his enemy. He's starting to improve weapon technology. And then he starts to move those people across the empire, which means we get a transfer of knowledge. Things that were known how to do in Hungary, those techniques start to pop up in China. And things that were being done in China start to pop up in the Middle East. And this is the great thing about the Mongolian Empire, is that it orchestrates a cultural diffusion in a very short period of time, and it's a very significant diffusion of knowledge across Eurasia. And you can see the extent of the Mongolian reach. He also is going to produce siege weapons. Siege weapons are those things that are used to overcome castles, to take down the walls of castles and the walls of cities. And also, it is believed that this is where the cannon first begins. So not only is the Mongolian culture spreading across Eurasia, there's also gunpowder spreading across Eurasia. There's new weaponry being spread across Eurasia. And the introduction of siege weapons, which become popular all throughout Eurasia, is going to spell the end of the castle and the city walls as a way of defending a position. So the Mongols are really changing the way war is fought and war is waged. When we look at the governing methods of Genghis Khan, as he creates this huge empire, and one of the things that we talked about was, how do you maintain unity within such a large and diverse population? Well, one thing he has going for is, you don't screw with Genghis Khan, because he will obliterate your city. So that psychological fear that he inspired in people became part of that reason for unity of the empire. But more than that, he creates a centralized rule where he relies on already existing bureaucracies. And none of this is more true than in the Persian area, in what is present day Iran, this region right here. He takes those Persian bureaucrats who are working for the Abbasid Caliphate, who are working for the Khwarezmian dynasty, and he employs them not just in Iran, but throughout the Mongolian Empire. So now we have Persian culture making its way out to China. The second thing he orchestrates is freedom of religion throughout his whole empire. The third thing, and this is the one you want to star, and this is the one that I'm going to emphasize in class, the Pax Mongolica. The Pax Mongolica literally translates as the peace or the peace of the Mongols, or the Mongolian peace. Trade is going to start to grow along the Silk Roads. Trade is going to get invigorated. Is that a word? It's going to be resuscitated because what the Mongols are doing is guaranteeing the safety of that trade. In other words, nobody is going to rob anyone on the Silk Roads because the Mongols will punish you severely. They won't just kill you, they'll torture you. And what people learn real quick is not to screw with this system. And what happens is that when there's safety that the Mongols are able to impose, there becomes trade. The other thing that comes along is that this trade is encouraged by currency developments like using credit, using checks, and other financial innovations that allow trade to take off. We'll talk about that another time. And then, of course, the transfer to skilled laborers throughout the empire. So when he's governing, he moves people around. He brings architects from Italy and puts them into Mongolia to help build his city. And that is going to encourage a cultural diffusion across this empire. So now that you're tired of watching that map go on and on, let's come to what happens after Genghis Khan dies. Genghis Khan, like all historical figures, is going to die. And what happens is that great Mongolian empire is going to be divided into khanates. And if it helps, just think of it as being a state ruled by a khan. So a khan is like chief, king, emperor, whatever you want to call it. And these khanates are really 4 states with 4 separate khans. There was an attempt to follow one great khan, but that fell apart pretty quickly. And what happens is that Genghis Khan's empire breaks into 4. And these 4 empires, these 4 regions we're going to talk about next slide, we want to understand the distinct differences between them. But for our purposes right now, we want to get to know them. The green represents the Yan dynasty. So what happens is, if you remember, China is under the Song dynasty at the beginning of this course. The Mongols come in, and by 1279, this region gets unified into one kingdom called the Yan dynasty, okay, or the Khanate of the Great Khan. So you'll see that Korea is included in, you'll see that Tibet's included in. This is by far the largest, most unified East Asian empire that we've seen. And we'll talk about how the Yan dynasty continues a lot of Chinese practices. So the Yan dynasty follows right after the Song. In the purple is the Ilkhanate. And the Ilkhanate is going to take up the Middle East. What used to be the Abbasid Caliphate is going to come under the rule of the Mongolians. They're not going to be able to penetrate into Delhi Sultanate, and the Mamluk Caliphate, in cooperation with European crusaders, is going to resist the Mongolian expansion into Egypt, into this part of the Arabian Peninsula. Which, if you really think about it, here is the Mamluk Egyptians who are Muslims, and here are Christian crusaders. They should be enemies. And yet both of them recognize the great threat that the Mongolian Empire presented to the two of them, and they joined together to stop the expansion of the Mongolians. So the Mongols end up here in the Ilkhanate, what is basically Persia. The Golden Horde is going to end up in Russia. And if you remember, I talked about this idea that there are states forming called Kiev Rus. And this region right here, you'll notice that they're not inside the yellow. But what's happening is that this area of the Golden Horde is going to exert a great deal of control over this Russian, over this Russian region. We're going to talk about that more in the next slide. So we want to associate the Golden Horde with Russia. And then we have this one in the middle, the Chagatia, the Chagatai. Don't worry about it. There's not a lot you need to know other than it's in Central Asia. Okay, and the Silk Road is going to run through it. But other than that, it's not something that you would want to spend a lot of time on. We want to, for our purposes, focus on these three areas: the green, the purple, and the yellow. Now, later, after the death of Genghis Khan, anybody who wants any political power in this area of the world is going to claim descendancy from Genghis Khan. To be a descendant of Genghis Khan is to elevate you in the eyes of everyone else. So you have this idea that Genghis Khan becomes almost a god of the Mongols. And any leader who can say, I am the son, or I am the grandson, or I am the great grandson, or I'm the great great grandson of Genghis Khan is somebody who has legitimacy and credibility. What happens is we get two people who claim descendancy, one legitimately, one probably. And they both trace themselves back to Genghis Khan, and they are the only two conquerors that I need you to know. There's more than these two, but these are the only two I want you to recognize. One is Kublai Khan. What Kublai Khan does is he comes in and conquers Song Dynasty in China. So the initial expansion is kind of up here. That's Genghis Khan. What Kublai Khan does is he conquers the rest of China, which is quite a feat. And then this area, much later in the 1300s, is going to fall to a conqueror named Timur the Lame or Tamerlan. And Tamerlan is going to just wreak havoc. And he's actually going to extend and bring destruction to the Delhi Sultanate. And it was said that in the middle of the capital city, he did such a number on him that not even birds sang because he had wiped out so much. And what Timur the Lame does, Tamerlane does, is he builds an empire right in the middle, kind of overlapping a little bit with the orange, called the Timurid Empire. Just know that it's an attempt to reestablish the Mongolian Empire, and it fails. So the Mongolian Empire breaks up, and then in the 1300s, late 1300s, this descendant of Genghis Khan named Timur the Lame tries to resurrect the Mongolian Empire from Central Asia. That's called the Timurid Empire. It doesn't last too long, and it's not something I would spend a lot of time worrying about. The only thing you need to know, and this would go with Timurid Empire in the 1300s, is that this represents the end of the influence of nomadic groups. So even though the Mongolians have such a huge influence over such a wide area, it is also the last that we'll see of a nomadic group dominating in this way. So, and then after this is kind of just small little groups giving other countries a hard time. So now let's get to the impact of the Mongols. And this is kind of the big part. So everything up to now has been setting it up. This is the big part. This is the slide that you really want to pay attention to in terms of AP exam material. So we'll go through the three regions I talked about already. With Russia, controlled by the Golden Horde. The Golden Horde had no interest in controlling and settling in the Kiev Rus, what is today Western Russian states, because so much of Western Russia was wooded. So if you're a pastoralist, if you're nomadic, and if I can go back to a second, if I can go back a slide, if you're nomadic, this area is ideal for grazing your herds. So remember, these are pastoralists. They use herds. They have their animals graze on land. All of this is woods. You do not want to go into that area and settle it. Yet the Mongols want to maintain control, so they create a tribute system. So what happens is the Mongols tell these little city-states in present-day Ukraine and present-day Russia, and they say, if you pay us money on a yearly basis, we will leave you alone. If you don't pay, we'll come and conquer you again. So these city-states that will eventually become the basis for Russia, what they start to do is they pay their tribute to the Mongols. And one city is going to emerge as a central figure to this process, and that's Moscow. And the city of Moscow, which is a duchy, the prince of Moscow collects the money from the other Russian princes, and he pays off the Mongols on a yearly basis. But like any good leader, he takes a little bit from the top. He keeps a little bit for himself, a processing fee, if you will. And over time, the Prince of Moscow starts to build up a significant army that he will use later to resist the Mongols and kick them out for good. But what's happening is that the central leadership of Moscow is being laid right now. Because the city of Moscow is becoming a central leader, they're going to be a central leader to kicking out the Mongols. And then Moscow is going to start orchestrating the development of a central state with the Prince of Moscow becoming the Tsar, or a variation of the word Caesar. And that's where we get the birth of modern day Russia. So Russia today is born out of the Mongolian control. And the other thing that we should just add in, the Russian military is known to be harsh, to be vicious, to be, the training methods to be very hard and harsh on the people. They get that from the Mongols. That Russian army tradition is built off of imitating the Mongolian army tradition that they fought against in the 1400s. We'll talk about Russia much later. Meanwhile, in China, we have a new government, a new dynasty called the Yan dynasty, which tells us something about Kublai Khan. He takes on the mandate of heaven. He starts to incorporate Chinese traditional practices of politics. He goes to the people and he goes, obviously, I have the mandate of heaven. Obviously, the Sung dynasty was in a state of corruption. The heavens want me on the throne. I am the son of heaven now. So he becomes a Chinese emperor, even though he's Mongolian. But what happens is that when he brings in Islamic scholars and Islamic bureaucrats to run the Chinese government, the Confucian scholars that dominated so much of the bureaucracy begin to go into decline. So Confucian scholars, the backbone, if you will, if you remember the scholar gentry and the privilege that they enjoyed, they lose that privilege under the Mongolians. And the other thing is that the Mongolians, with their religious toleration, are going to encourage Buddhism and Taoism and Islam within China. And that means the Confucian scholar is losing their status. The second thing is that the civil service, actually, I'll come back to number one, the civil service exam comes to an end. The Mongols are going to import administrators instead of giving the bureaucratic jobs to the native Chinese. And if you remember, having one of those bureaucrat jobs was a ticket to being well off. So that represents a significant change to China's way of doing things. Second thing is that the women of the Mongols, they will not do foot binding. That's just unacceptable. The women of the Mongols, they wore basically what we would consider jeans today, two-legged pants instead of the traditional dresses of the Chinese women. So when we see the Mongolian women interacting in Chinese society, they reject all that patriarchy. They refuse to accept those things. And we do see a decline of foot binding amongst the people. Third thing is that while the Mongols do adopt some of the Chinese practices, for example, the concept of the mandate of heaven, they reject the Chinese in general. The Mongols go out of their way to create two separate groups within China, the Mongols and the Chinese. And the Mongols refuse to allow the Chinese to marry in between the two groups. And they also refuse to allow the Chinese to learn the Mongolian language. This way, they can keep an edge over the Chinese because the Mongolian language becomes the language of the government. Kublai Khan, as emperor of China, encouraged policies of trade. He opened up the Silk Road more and more. More trade is coming in, and he's much more supportive of merchants, which is another change away from Chinese culture. Chinese culture usually held merchants at a much lower status. But with Kublai Khan's encouragement of trade, the merchant elevates in status. The Silk Road opens up to more travel. There's more activity along the Silk Road because of the protection Kublai Khan is providing, but also because Kublai Khan is encouraging the trade. So this means more and more Islamic influence is going to work its way into China because so many of the merchants along the Silk Road were Muslim. And that brings me to the Muslim influence. By opening this trade up to the Western world, Islam is going to work its way more and more into China than we've seen before. On top of that, you have Kublai Khan importing, if you will, Persian bureaucrats from the Middle East, which brings the religion of Islam into China. So sometimes when we think of Islam, we don't necessarily think of China as having a strong Muslim influence. And yet, under the Yuan dynasty, it does. Even though the Mongols are going to continue to practice their shamanism and traditional religions. And we're going to talk about why that's important much later. The fourth thing I do want to say about Kublai Khan is his policies of building hospitals. If you think about the Muslim influence, the Muslims were renowned for their medical knowledge and for their scientific knowledge. So it would follow that Muslims would build hospitals that were much better than anything the Chinese had seen. And this also reflects one more thing, how Muslim intellectual ideas begin to spread across the Mongolian Empire. So again, we get to a form of cultural diffusion, in this case, intellectual diffusion, that happens because of the Mongolian Empire. Now, Kublai Khan eventually dies, and he has successors. And over time, the Chinese begin to really sour on the Mongolian rule. The Mongolians are seen as outsiders ruling over the Chinese. They're seen as less than civilized. And the idea that the Chinese were being pushed out of the bureaucracy, that Confucianism was being pushed down in the level of importance. Also, how the Mongols took farmland from the Chinese to use as grazing land for their animals. This is going to create resentment over time, and eventually a revolt in 1368 is going to break out. And this revolt is going to get rid of the Mongols altogether and bring about a new emperor who claims the mandate of heaven. And this begins the Ming dynasty in 1368. And we'll talk more about the Ming as we go along. Finally, we get to the Middle East. So the Middle East, we call that area the Ilkhanate. And what happens in the conquest of the Middle East is that the Mongolians come in and they rely on the Persian bureaucracy to continue to run the show. But unlike China, the Mongolians start to blend in with the Persian and the Middle Eastern groups around them. The Mongolians convert to Islam. Religious tolerance within this region comes to an end. And Islam is the one that is promoted and protected and supported. Agriculture, the Mongols who start to marry into the Persian culture and start to blend in, they begin to take up agriculture. And the Ilkhanate transforms from a nomadic civilization, which the Golden Horde maintained, to an agrarian society. Now in China, we still have agrarianism, but the Mongols aren't the ones farming. It's the Chinese peasants who are doing the farming. In the Middle East, the Mongols become landowners, they become farmers, and they assimilate over time into that region. And then the last thing to say is the importance of the relationship to Genghis Khan versus Muhammad. So if you remember me talking about the Abbasid Caliphate, which was conquered by the Mongol Empire, that's how the Abbasids come to an end. Baghdad is conquered by the Mongols. It's done. But for a long time, claiming lineage from Muhammad, whether it be a direct family line or it be through association, was a key to political credibility. What's happening is that in this region, laying claim to being a descendant of Genghis Khan is the key to credibility. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up by just saying that the Mongolian Empire, short-lived as it was, helped to integrate the various parts of Eurasia that it touched. And it sets up for future developments in different regions. For example, the modern state of Russia doesn't exist without the Mongols first in there. China goes a different way if it wasn't for the Mongol influence. The Middle East assimilates the Mongols into their society. So you have different ways that the Mongols influence and impact these various civilizations. But it's that interconnection of all the regions and the transference of knowledge and technology, especially one key technology that's going to change everything, gunpowder. That transference is what makes the Mongolian Empire so significant. And with that, I'll wrap it up. If you have any questions, please bring them to class, and I will see you for the next lecture. Bye. I'm sorry, I'm looking for how to end the recording. Uh-oh, it's not there. There it is. Okay, bye.